The conference room was a study in aggressive opulence, all dark mahogany and polished brass, designed to make you feel small, insignificant, and grateful for whatever crumbs might fall from the high table of the legal gods. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather, stale coffee, and the barely concealed avarice of my family. They were all there, arranged like vultures who had prematurely preened themselves for a feast. Aunt Meredith, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon, her face pulled tight in a mask of practiced grief that didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. My cousin Richard, checking his watch every 3 minutes, already mentally spending money he hadn't yet received on another failed venture capital project, and Uncle Robert, blustering and red-faced, who had spent the last decade ignoring my grandfather's existence, but now sat at the head of the table as if he were the rightful patriarch. I sat in the corner, in a chair that felt slightly lower than the others, a physical manifestation of my place in the family hierarchy. I was the quiet one, the unremarkable one, the one who had failed to launch, because I had spent my 20s and 30s caring for the man whose death they were now secretly celebrating. They didn't see me as a threat, or even really as a participant. I was just furniture, a piece of necessary clutter to be cleared away once the real business was concluded. Mr. Thorne, grandfather's lawyer for 40 years, sat at the head of the table. He was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Savile Row wool, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp and unimpressed by the theatrics of the people before him. He cleared his throat, a dry, decisive sound that instantly silenced the hushed, greedy murmurings of the room. He began to read, his voice a steady, emotionless drone that listed assets, stocks, and properties, dividing the spoils of a 90-year life into neat, digestible percentages. The tension in the room was palpable, a vibrating wire of expectation. Meredith got the jewelry in the vacation home in Aspen. Richard received a substantial trust fund that I knew would be gone within a year. Robert got the vintage car collection and the majority of the blue-chip stock portfolio. With every bequest, there was a collective sigh of satisfaction, a subtle shifting in seats as they mentally tallied their new net worth. They were winning. They had survived the old man, and now they were reaping the rewards of their minimal efforts. Then Mr. Thorne paused. He looked over the rim of his spectacles, his gaze briefly flicking to me in my corner before returning to the document. And finally, he read, "To my granddaughter, Elara, who was there when no one else was." He paused again, and I felt every eye in the room swivel toward me, heavy with dismissive curiosity. What would the mouse get? A token? A keepsake? I leave my beloved companion Barnaby and the entirety of his contents. For a second, there was absolute silence. Then Richard snorted. It started as a suppressed chuckle, quickly turning into a full-blown guffaw. Aunt Meredith pressed a manicured hand to her lips, her shoulders shaking with mirth she pretended to hide. Even Uncle Robert let out a booming laugh, slapping the table. Barnaby. They knew who Barnaby was. Barnaby was grandfather's ancient, rusted, utterly derelict 1978 Winnebago. It had been parked behind the carriage house for 20 years. A monolithic eyesore of peeling beige paint and faded stripes, home to generations of raccoons and smelling faintly of mildew and old oil. It was a standing joke in the family, the land yacht he refused to scrap, the symbol of his eccentric, stubborn refusal to let go of the past. Leaving it to me was, in their eyes, the ultimate final prank. A senile old man's last bit of confused humor. I didn't laugh. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, not because of the bequest, but because of their cruelty. They thought it was funny that he had left me nothing but a piece of junk. They thought it fitting. I was the stray, and I had been left the doghouse. I kept my eyes on my hands, folded tightly in my lap, waiting for the laughter to die down, waiting for the inevitable condescending pats on the arm, the "Don't worry, dear, we'll help you pay to have it towed away." The laughter subsided slowly, dying down into smirks and whispered asides. They were already moving on, their attention shifting back to the important things, the liquidation schedules, the tax implications of their new wealth. They had forgotten me again, dismissed back into the corner with my rusted inheritance. But Mr. Thorne hadn't finished. He hadn't put the papers down. He waited, with the terrifying patience of a predator who knows the trap is already sprung, until the room was absolutely silent again. He took a sip of water, deliberately prolonging the moment. "I was not finished," he said, his voice cutting through the lingering smugness like a glacial wind. The room froze. The smiles wavered, then vanished. "I leave my beloved companion Barnaby and the entirety of his contents," he repeated, with a strange new emphasis on the last word. "Furthermore, it is my express instruction that the vehicle known as Barnaby not be opened, entered, or moved by anyone other than Alara until she is ready to do so. To facilitate this, and to ensure she has ample space to enjoy her inheritance." He turned a page, the crisp sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I also leave her the High Meadow estate in its entirety, including the main house, the carriage house, all outbuildings, and the surrounding 400 acres of unencumbered land, to be hers absolutely and in fee simple." The silence that fell now was not the silence of anticipation. It was the silence of a vacuum, all the air sucked out of the room in a single, violent instant. Aunt Meredith gasped, a strangled, ugly sound. Richard's jaw actually dropped, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure of himself. Uncle Robert half rose from his chair, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "That's impossible," Robert sputtered, his voice thick with disbelief. "The estate is the bulk of that's everything. The house alone is worth millions. He can't have left it to her." Mr. Thorne looked at Robert with icy detachment. "I assure you, Mr. Vance, he could, and he did. The will is ironclad. He was of sound mind, extraordinarily sound mind, I might add, when we drafted this codicil 6 months ago." He looked back at me, and for the first time I saw something soften in his eyes, a flicker of genuine respect, perhaps even shared amusement. "He also left a letter for you, Alara, to be read in private." He slid a thick cream-colored envelope across the polished mahogany. It sat there between us, a physical manifestation of the bomb that had just detonated in the center of my family. I reached out and took it, my hand trembling slightly. I could feel their eyes on me now, no longer dismissive, but burning with a mixture of shock, fury, and terrifying sudden calculation. The dynamic in the room had shifted so violently it made me dizzy. Seconds ago I was the poor relation, the object of their pity and ridicule. Now I was the owner of the very roof over their heads, the ground beneath their feet. I was no longer furniture. I was the landlord. The meeting dissolved into chaos almost immediately after that. There were shouts, threats of lawsuits, demands to see the real Will. Mr. Thorne packed up his briefcase with unhurried, practiced calm, immune to their hysterics. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod before he left, leaving me alone in the room with wolves who had suddenly realized they were actually sheep. I didn't stay to hear their recriminations. I clutched the envelope to my chest and walked out, past Aunt Meredith, who was sobbing theatrically into her scarf, past Richard, who was furiously typing on his phone, likely calling his own lawyer, and past Uncle Robert, who just stared at me with a look of utter, bewildered betrayal. I drove straight to High Meadow. The estate was massive, rolling hills and ancient forests that had been in our family for 4 generations. The main house, a sprawling stone mansion that always felt too cold and too big, loomed on the hill. But I didn't go there. I drove past it, down the rutted gravel track that led behind the carriage house to where Barnaby sat. It looked even sadder than I remembered, covered in a fresh layer of autumn leaves, one of its tires completely flat. It was a ridiculous object, ugly, outdated, entirely without grace. And I loved it. I loved it because it was his. Grandfather had bought it 40 years ago against everyone's advice, planning to travel the country with my grandmother. She died before they could go, and he had never had the heart to take it out alone, so it sat, a monument to a dream deferred. But it hadn't just sat there. It had been our secret place. When I was a child, hiding from the loud, demanding voices of my cousins and aunts, I would sneak out here. Grandfather would find me, not with scolding, but with 2 mugs of hot cocoa. We would sit in the dusty captain's chairs that smelled of old vinyl and talk for hours. He told me stories about his life, not the sanitized versions he told at dinner parties, but the real ones, the failures, the fears, the regrets. He knew me. He saw the quiet observer in me, not as a weakness, but as a kindred spirit. He knew I was the only one who didn't want something from him, but just wanted to be with him. I stood before the old Winnebago now, the rusted key Mr. Thorne had given me heavy in my pocket. The laughter from the boardroom still echoed in my ears, a stinging reminder of what they really thought of me. They thought I was trash, so he had left me the trash. But he had known, as he always did, that one man's trash is another's treasure. I wasn't ready to open it yet. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the overgrown grass. I sat on the rusted metal step, the same step where we used to sit and watch the fireflies, and I finally opened the letter. His handwriting was shaky, a stark contrast to the bold, confident script I remembered from my childhood, but still legible. "My dearest Alara," it began, "if you are reading this, then the vultures have already gathered, and Thorne has dropped the anvil. I hope you enjoyed the look on Robert's face. I've been imagining it for months, and it's been a great comfort to me in these final days." I smiled through the tears that had begun to blur my vision. He was mischievous to the end. They laughed, didn't they, when he read the bit about Barnaby? I knew they would. They never saw past the rust. They never looked closely enough at anything to see its true value. That's why they don't deserve High Meadow. They see it as an asset, a line item on a balance sheet. You see it as home. You see the way the light hits the old oak tree in the mornings. You know where the floorboards creak in the library. You loved it for what it was, not for what it was worth. I wiped my eyes. his voice so clear in my mind it was as if he were sitting right next to me. You have spent your whole life making yourself small so others could feel big, Alara. You stepped back so they could shine, even when their light was artificial and garish. I watched you do it, and it broke my heart, because you have a light that is so much truer than theirs. I wanted to give you one final gift, not just the estate, that's just land and stone. I wanted to give you the opportunity to stop being small. They will come for you now. They will try to bully you, manipulate you, guilt you into giving them what they think is theirs. Don't let them. You are stronger than you know. You are the keeper of this place now. And as for Barnaby, well, I always told you he was special. Take a look inside when you're ready. Remember, the best hiding spots are the ones no one would ever deign to look at. I love you, my quiet warrior, grandfather. I sat there until the sun was completely gone and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. I felt a shift deep inside me, a tectonic grinding of old habits breaking apart. He was right. I had spent a lifetime apologizing for my own existence, trying not to take up space. I had nursed him through his long decline, sleeping on a cot in his study for 3 years while they visited on holidays for an hour at a time, checking their watches. I had earned this, not because I wanted it, but because I had loved him. The siege began the very next morning. I was staying in the main house. It felt strange, ghost-like, to be there alone when the first car arrived. It was Aunt Meredith, armed with a casserole and a terrifyingly bright smile. She didn't knock. She just breezed in as if she still owned the place. "Alara, darling, I was so worried about you last night. You ran off so quickly." She set the casserole on the kitchen island, her eyes darting around the room as if counting the silverware to make sure I hadn't pawned it overnight. "This must all be so overwhelming for you. A girl like you, suddenly burdened with all this responsibility." There it was, the opening salvo. A girl like me. "I'm fine, Aunt Meredith," I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. I was making tea, standing in the same spot where I used to make Grandfather his morning Earl Grey. It grounded me. "It's a lot to process, but I'm fine." "Well, of course you think you are, dear," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "But running an estate like High Meadow, it's enormously complex. The taxes alone are a nightmare, and the maintenance. Your Uncle Robert is very worried that you might be in over your head. He's willing, generously I might add, to step in as a trustee, to help you manage things. We could set up a nice little allowance for you, let you stay in the carriage house rent-free, and he would handle all the difficult business." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. They wanted me to voluntarily sign myself back into irrelevance. They wanted to pat me on the head, give me an allowance, and take back what they believed was rightfully theirs. They didn't see a person. They saw an obstacle to be managed. "That won't be necessary," I said, turning to face her. I didn't offer her tea. "Mr. Thorne and I are already handling the transition. I have a meeting with the estate managers tomorrow." Her smile faltered, the mask slipping just a fraction. "Alara, be reasonable. You've never managed anything bigger than a grocery budget. This is millions of dollars we're talking about. It's family legacy. You can't just keep it." "Grandfather seemed to think I could," I said quietly. "He left it to me, Meredith. Not to you, not to Robert. To me. The use of her first name without the deferential aunt hit her like a physical slap. Her eyes narrowed. He was old, Alara. He was confused. We all know you took advantage of him in those last few years, isolating him from the rest of us. I didn't isolate him. I cut in, my voice rising just a little. You stopped coming. There's a difference. I was here because I loved him. You were absent because he was no longer useful to you. She gasped, genuinely shocked that the mouse had found its teeth. How dare you? We have lawyers, you know. We can contest this. We can tie you up in court for years. You'll lose everything just trying to defend it. Then I guess I'll see you in court, I said, and I turned back to my tea. She stood there for another moment, radiating furious impotence, before turning on her heel and storming out. The slam of the heavy oak front door echoed through the house like a cannon shot. It was the first victory. It felt terrifying and wonderful. They didn't stop, of course. Robert called, alternating between blustering threats and weeping pleas about family unity. Richard sent me a barrage of emails detailing investment opportunities that were thinly veiled attempts to get me to liquidate assets and hand him the cash. I ignored them all. I spent my days walking the property, reacquainting myself with the land I now owned. I found that the feeling of being overwhelmed that they had all predicted never actually arrived. Instead, I felt a profound sense of connection. I knew this place. I knew that the west pasture needed better drainage, and that the roof on the old barn needed patching before winter. These weren't abstract management problems. They were just things that needed doing, and I knew how to do things. I had spent my life doing the unglamorous, necessary things while they chased applause. A week after the funeral, I finally felt ready to face Barnaby. I walked out to the Winnebago with a bucket of soapy water and a scrub brush. It felt right to clean him up before I went inside, a gesture of respect. As I scrubbed away decades of grime from the beige metal, I thought about Grandfather's letter, the entirety of his contents. What could be in here that was so important? He wasn't a man who hoarded cash. He believed money should be working, invested. I unlocked the door. The hinges groaned in protest. The inside smelled heavily of dust, old carpet, and the faint, lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. It was a time capsule. 1970s orange shag carpet, wood grain laminate counters, upholstery patterned in violently clashing shades of brown and yellow. It was hideous and perfect. I walked through the narrow space, trailing my fingers over the surfaces. Everything seemed normal. Old maps in the driver's side door pocket, canned beans in the tiny cupboard that had probably expired in 1985. I sat on the bench seat at the small dinette table. This was where we had sat. I looked around, trying to see what he had wanted me to see. The best hiding spots are the ones no one would ever deign to look at. I looked down at the table. It was bolted to the floor, standard for an RV, but the laminate top was slightly loose at one corner. I wiggled it. It wasn't just loose. It was designed to lift off. I pulled at it, and the entire tabletop came away, revealing a shallow compartment underneath. Inside were not stacks of cash or gold bars, but books, dozens of them, old leather-bound ledgers and journals. I lifted one out. It wasn't a financial ledger. It was a diary. I opened it to a random page, dated 30 years ago. It was an entry about Robert. Robert came today, asked for another loan for that restaurant idea. I know he'll never pay it back, just like the last 3. He thinks I don't see the contempt in his eyes when he looks at this old house, the way he's already mentally redecorating. He doesn't love this place. He loves what it can buy him. I picked up another. It was about me, from when I was 10. Elara found the fox den near the creek today. She didn't try to touch the kits, just watched them for hours. She has a stillness to her, a rare gift of observation. She's the only one who truly sees the land. The others just see the property value. I sat there for hours, reading. These weren't just diaries. They were a comprehensive chronicle of our family, written with brutal love and honesty. He had seen everything, every manipulation, every lie, every act of genuine kindness. And interspersed between the journal entries were other papers, original deeds, stock certificates in companies I'd never heard of, bearer bonds that looked incredibly old. I realized with a jolt that the contents of Barnaby weren't just sentimental. He had slowly, over years, moved the most liquid, valuable parts of his estate out of the bank vaults and into this rusted hulk. He had hidden his true fortune in the one place he knew they would never, ever dirty their hands to look. The house and land were worth millions, yes, but what was in these ledgers, it was staggering. It was complete financial independence, untraceable, and known only to me. He hadn't just given me a home. He had given me an arsenal. I was still sitting there, surrounded by the ledgers, when I heard a hesitant knock on the open Winnebago door. I jumped, instinctively trying to cover the papers. It was Leo, Uncle Robert's youngest son. He was only 19, a quiet, artistic boy who, like me, always seemed to be on the fringes of the family gatherings. "Hi, Aunt Elara," he said, looking awkward. I just wanted to see if you were okay. Dad's been rampaging around the house for days, talking about lawsuits, and it sounded awful. I wanted to make sure you weren't, I don't know, sad." He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at my face, his expression genuinely concerned. I felt a tight knot in my chest loosen. Not everyone was a vulture. "I'm okay, Leo. Come in." He stepped inside, looking around curiously. "Whoa, this is retro." "It's something, all right," I smiled. "Dad says it's a heap of junk. He was laughing about it." "I know he was." "He's wrong, though," Leo said, running a hand over the orange upholstery. "It's cool. It's got character. It's like a secret clubhouse." Tears pricked my eyes. He saw it, just like Grandfather had known I would see it. "It is exactly like a secret clubhouse," I agreed. "Leo, do you want to see something amazing?" I showed him the journals, not the financial ones, but the stories. We sat there for another hour, reading Grandfather's funny, insightful observations about the world. Leo laughed out loud at a description of a pompous neighbor that Grandfather had despised. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel alone. I had an ally, not a powerful one, perhaps, but a real one. The next few weeks were a blur of activity, but it was the good kind, productive, focused. I hired my own team of forensic accountants to go through the Barnaby papers. The final tally was breathtaking. I could fix up High Meadow 10 times over and still never have to worry about money again. But I didn't tell the rest of the family. I let them continue to believe I was struggling with just the burden of the physical estate. I let them underestimate me. It was a powerful tactical advantage. The climax came a month later, when Robert officially filed a suit to contest the will, claiming undue influence and mental incompetence. We met in a neutral location, another stuffy boardroom, this time at a mediation center. Robert was smug, flanked by two aggressive-looking lawyers. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I would crumble under the pressure of litigation. "Look, Elara," he said, leaning across the table, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Just sign over trusteeship of the estate. We'll let you keep the carriage house, and we'll even give you a generous stipend. We just want to protect Dad's legacy from mismanagement." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the bluster. He needed this. He was over-leveraged, drowning in debt I now knew about, because Grandfather had documented it all. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single photocopy of one of the journal pages, the one about his loans and his contempt for the house. I slid it across the table. "I don't think a judge would look kindly on your concern for his legacy when he documented your 50 years of trying to bleed him dry," I said calmly. Robert picked up the paper. His face went gray. "Where did you get this?" "Barnaby," I said, enjoying the way the name made him flinch. "It's all in Barnaby, Robert. Everything. Every loan you never repaid. Every time Meredith borrowed Mother's jewelry and never returned it. Every time Richard tried to scam him. He wrote it all down, and I have it all. Do you really want that read into the public record during a trial?" The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. His lawyers looked at the paper, then at each other, and I saw the moment they realized their case was dead in the water. They weren't just fighting a will anymore. They were fighting a documented history of their own greed. Robert slumped back in his chair, defeated by the very man he thought he had outsmarted. "What do you want?" he rasped. "I want you to drop the suit. I want you to never step foot on High Meadow again without my express invitation. And I want you to leave me alone." He nodded, slowly, painfully. It was over. I drove back to High Meadow that evening with the windows down, letting the cool night air rush in. I felt light, untethered from decades of their expectations and judgments. They had laughed when my name was read. They had thought it was the punchline to a joke. They hadn't understood that the joke was on them. I wasn't just the keeper of the estate. I was the keeper of the truth. I pulled up to the main house, its windows dark and welcoming. I had already started making changes. I had hired a gardener to help restore Grandmother's rose garden, which had been neglected for too long. I had invited Leo to come stay for the summer and use the sunroom as an art studio. I was filling the house with life again, not just expensive artifacts. I walked down to Barnaby one last time before bed. I patted his rusted flank affectionately. I wouldn't restore him, I decided. I would keep him exactly as he was, a rusty, ugly, magnificent reminder that true worth isn't always visible from the outside. I sat on the step and looked up at the stars, clear and bright above my land. I'd spent so long being the supporting character in their drama. Now, I was finally the protagonist of my own story. If you're reading this, if you've ever been the one in the corner, the one they talk over, the one they underestimate, let them. Let them laugh. Let them think you are weak while you're quietly building your strength. Because the loudest people in the room are often the emptiest, and sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the rust, just waiting for someone patient enough to find them. Your time will come, and when it does, don't you dare apologize for taking what is yours.